Good morning. I'm Saini at the University of Canberra, and I'm in my weekly conversation with Michelle Grattan. Good morning, Michelle.
Hi, Deep.
A bit chilly and foggy this morning.
That's right, a bit like the politics.
Yeah, except that the chill hasn't stopped the heat from rising in the Parliament. It continues to be combative, particularly over the budget issues. The bills haven't even made it to the Senate yet. We don't know what's going to happen there, and perhaps you do. Tell us, how do you predict things would unfold in the Senate?
The government will have difficulty with some of its key budget measures, even though there's a lot of general argument and heat over the bank tax. That one's sure to go through. But on education and the increase in the Medicare levy, it's a different story. The Labor Party has been resisting the government's schools package, so on that it's going to have to negotiate with the Greens or the other crossbenchers to get that through, and that's a quite interesting story in itself because the Greens are on the spot. On the Medicare levy, the Labor Party of course agrees that it should be increased for higher income earners but not for lower income earners, and we'll have to see how that plays out. The Labor Party is actually somewhat on the back foot this last week because many people, many commentators are saying it's being hypocritical over the schools package, which is needs-based and which one would think that the Labor Party should support even if it says the funding is inadequate, and on the Medicare levy where of course the Labor government had an increase in the levy which went across all tax brackets.
Now, as you said earlier, the Labour Party is opposed to the school funding issue, but the Greens are sitting on the fence still. They're still figuring out what their position would be. Government is going to need perhaps the support from the Greens to get it through.
Its first port of call is the Greens, and then the fallback position is to go to the other crossbenchers. The Greens are in an interesting bind on this. Many of their supporters in the electorate just don't like the idea of the Greens negotiating with the Liberals under any circumstances. So politically it's a bit risky for the Greens. There's also division among the Green senators. When the schools package was initially announced, Senator Hanson-Young, who's the spokesperson in the area, was obviously attracted to it, and I think that her inclination would be to find a way to support it with some amendments. Probably that is the position of the leader, Richard Di Natale, but others are more doubtful. So it is something that's a work in progress. The Australian Education Union, which represents government school teachers, is very opposed, and again that's something of a difficulty for the Greens. So we'll have to see over the coming weeks what happens. The Greens are saying, well, they'll wait and see what comes out of the short Senate inquiry that'll be underway.
Now, Parliament is not the only place where action has been happening last week. One Nation's party seemed to be in some trouble again with the leaked tapes that appear to indicate that James Ashby was talking about scamming the Queensland taxpayer in the interest of the party to make some extra money for the party. That surely can't be good for the One Nation party. How do you think that is going to play out in the public opinion?
James Ashby is a very, very central figure in One Nation. He has really got a lot of power in the party. He's Pauline Hanson's right-hand man. You always see him in the pictures when she's on camera, walking about Parliament or giving news conferences or whatever. This week there was rather an extraordinary news conference where they both appeared in the wake of this revelation about the talk about the scam at this One Nation meeting, and it was really Pauline Hanson playing a supportive role to James Ashby. Anyway, she has stood by him. They point out that the idea was just floated at the meeting, that it wasn't taken up, that it's not happening, and therefore they're trying to say, well, nothing to see here. But the Labor Party has referred it to the police. The police are considering whether they should investigate, and so they'll make a decision, and if they do decide to investigate, then it's bad news, obviously, for James Ashby and One Nation, and Pauline Hanson in particular. If they don't, if they say, well, there's nothing in this, it's still, I think, a dent for the party because he's such an important figure. He's also someone who has upset quite a few grassroots members of the party because he's fairly full on, and they feel that the party is, not just James Ashby but others too, is too dictatorial or dismissive, if you like, in its attitude to members. And so you get a lot of discontented former candidates coming out publicly and condemning things that have happened in the party. Essentially, it's an unstable operation. But nevertheless, it has quite a lot of support electorally, especially in Queensland. Queensland elections coming up in either later this year, early next year. That'll be the big test for One Nation and for Pauline Hanson.
Now, on the other side of the world, there was this tragic event in Manchester, sad event. It certainly has ramifications for the rest of the world as well. Here at home, Malcolm Turnbull had conversations with our local security chiefs. What do you think the implications of this are for Australia, and how secure are we?
I think that the answer to how secure we are is that we're relatively secure, but in an insecure world you can never be totally secure. And Malcolm Turnbull this week produced some figures that showed that a number of potential plots, attacks had been thwarted, but of course we have had several incidents, and the Lindt Cafe one was clearly a very dramatic and very serious one that cost lives. I think that what we will see is a continuation of security tightening. The Prime Minister some time ago commissioned a report on security at public events, and he's soon to get that. So I would imagine that that would lead to some action, more action. Obviously there's quite a lot of security around these events. One big question is whether we should have a Homeland Security Department, and this has been much debated over some time. This would bring all the agencies under one minister, even though they'd have still autonomy, notably ASIO and the police. And there's divided feeling about that. Some people think it is important to have, for example, ASIO separate from an area like border security, that having it under the Attorney General, as it is at the moment, is important because there are questions of people's rights as well as questions of security involved with ASIO. So that'll be an interesting argument, I think, in the time ahead.
You mentioned Lindt Cafe, and the report, the coroner's report on that is out now, and it indicates very clearly that police took too long to act, and if they had acted earlier, that might have saved some lives. That issue is probably going to also louden the calls for a national security body of some kind that could coordinate these reaction to these kind of events. Do you think it is going to actually have an impact?
I think there are a couple of things here. Firstly, coordination, of course, is vital. The general feeling is that among the federal agencies, it's good. There's also, though, the question of federal-state coordination between federal police, state police, and so on, and that can always be improved. There's the issue that's come up about whether the military should have more of a role in these sorts of incidents in responding. People's feelings are divided about that, or their assessments about whether that would really improve the situation. But I think it's also important to remember that while particular problems can be identified in the responses to a situation, that it's easy to second guess later. Because, for example, if we take the Link Cafe incident, if the police had gone in right at the start, then maybe it would have worked out differently, but also maybe people would have been killed too. Whenever they went in, I think that there was a risk that there would be a reaction from Manmonis, and that there would be deaths one way or the other.
The rear vision is always 2020.
Well, that's right.
Well, we will look forward rather than backwards and see what happens next week, and I look forward to our conversation on next Friday.
Thank you very much.